We live in an age obsessed with freedom. The freedom to choose, to build, to optimize, to become whatever we want, whenever we want. And yet, beneath the curated choices, behind the unlocked doors, an unsettling truth lingers. We've never felt more trapped, not in chains, not in prisons, but in habits, routines, expectations, self-imposed obligations disguised as freedom, because addiction doesn't always wear the face of chaos. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit, ticks every box, and smiles in the mirror. It looks like consistency. It sounds like discipline. It hides inside the productivity planner, the fitness tracker, the endless scroll of clean eating, cold plunges, and 5 a.m. meditations. It rewards you for obeying it until you realize you can't stop. And that's the catch. You don't notice you're addicted to control until the thought of letting go terrifies you more than anything else. It's easy to spot addiction when it's messy, when it wrecks homes, empties wallets, and spirals in plain sight. But there's a more dangerous kind, the one that masquerades as progress. The kind that whispers, "You're finally in control now. Just a little more discipline, and you'll be free." But control is a shapeshifter. It can become a cage just as easily as it becomes a key. Like Icarus, we escape the prison only to build wings so flawless, so perfectly engineered, that we forget. The warning, fly too high, and the sun will melt the glue. The more we chase sovereignty through control, the more brittle we become. Obsessed with monitoring every variable, terrified of slipping, convinced that one misstep will destroy everything. Eventually, life stops being lived and starts being managed. This is the paradox at the heart of modern freedom. We break free from one set of constraints only to trade them for subtler ones, softer chains, ones that look like goals, achievements, mastery. But behind the polished surface, there's a quiet desperation, a fear of falling out of control. Of falling, period. So what if the very thing we cling to for safety is the thing keeping us stuck? What if the addiction isn't to a substance or behavior, but to the illusion of being in charge? This is where the unraveling begins, not by rejecting freedom, but by questioning the form it's taken, and asking, finally, what have we mistaken for liberation? That was always just a prettier kind of prison. Control. The modern virtue no one questions. We call it responsibility, maturity, excellence. But beneath its polished exterior lies a truth few dare to face. Control isn't always about power. Sometimes it's about fear. Fear of chaos, fear of rejection, fear of feeling too much, too fast, all at once. We don't crave control because we're strong. We crave it because, somewhere deep down, something feels fundamentally unsafe. For some, it began in childhood. An unpredictable parent, a sudden loss, a world that didn't feel stable. So we coped the only way we knew how. We tightened the grip. We created structure. We made life predictable. But what starts as protection can become obsession. Every routine, every plan, every perfectly calibrated response becomes a fortress against the unknown. It's messy, the emotional, the uncontrollable. This is what trauma does. It teaches us to survive by narrowing life into controllable fragments. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile because we're afraid of what they might unleash. We control our diets to avoid emotional hunger. We control our schedules to avoid stillness. We control our image to avoid being truly seen. But the more control we seek, the more fragmented we become. Perfectionism isn't strength. It's fear in disguise. Hyperproductivity is often a trauma response, and clean living can mask an inner terror of contamination, not just of the body, but of the soul and society. It rewards this addiction. Michel Foucault warned us, in a disciplinary society, control becomes currency. The most functional are the most surveilled, their lives optimized, their choices recorded, their efficiency worshipped. We become model citizens, not because we are free, but because we have internalized the gaze. We police ourselves. We meet her in silence, an executive, always composed. Her calendar is full, her metrics are flawless. She wakes before sunrise, meditates, journals, tracks her macros, closes every ring. To others, she is the embodiment of success. But her days are sterile. There's no laughter in them, no chaos, no surrender. She hasn't cried in years, hasn't danced in decades. Her relationships are transactional, her self-worth measured by quarterly goals. When silence falls, it terrifies her. So she fills. Control for her is no longer a choice. It's a prison with invisible walls. And it's not just her. We're building a world that rewards the emotionally numb, that glorifies detachment, that praises those who don't feel too deeply, don't break the rules, don't question the system, but in that process we lose something vital. We lose our lives, we lose intimacy, we lose ourselves. And once you realize that control isn't keeping you safe, it's keeping you stuck, you start to ask, where did this all come from? Who benefits when fear becomes the organizing principle? Of a life? Of a society? Because if individuals use control to suppress their chaos, what happens when entire systems do the same? We've explored the personal addiction to control. But what if that's just the beginning? What if the society we live in is addicted too? The next step isn't just inward, it's outward. We begin to follow the ripple effect. How institutions mirror our inner fears, how they capitalize on our need for control, and how the addiction of one becomes the conditioning of millions. The cage wasn't just built by us, it was built for us. And we've been trained to keep it locked. You were never just chasing goals. You were being trained to crave the chase itself. We think addiction is personal, a defect, a weakness, a tragic flaw in individuals who lose control. But what if addiction to control isn't a bug in the system, but a feature? We live inside structures that thrive when we're endlessly striving. The more we try to be perfect, the more the machine runs smoothly. And so, it rewards the addicted, not with peace, but with validation, with likes, with bonuses, with approval, with the illusion of arrival that always stays one step out of reach. Michel Foucault called this biopower, a system that doesn't need to coerce bodies by force, because it trains them to regulate themselves. It doesn't need prison bars. It makes you your own warden. Bentham's panopticon imagined a prison where inmates never know when they're being watched. Eventually, they begin to behave as if they always are. But in our age, the panopticon has no tower, no warden, just cameras, metrics, and silent, invisible incentives. You perform because you believe someone is watching, even if no one is. You check your phone to see how your latest post is doing. You glance at your fitness tracker to confirm your heart rate is optimized. You walk into the office and smile at the badge scanner, never questioning who's counting or why. It feels normal, but what's normal is engineered. Think of how work has become a game. Performance dashboards, productivity points, employee of the month spotlights. The language of motivation hides the machinery of manipulation. Or look at the beauty industry. Not just the products, but the constant manufactured dissatisfaction. The mirror becomes a scoreboard. The algorithm learns your insecurities and feeds them back with surgical precision. Even morality becomes a market. Virtue signaling, public outrage, moral purity filtered through curated identities. Online mobs that aren't driven by conscience but by dopamine loops, likes, retweets, reputational points. None of it feels like coercion. That's what makes it work. The systems don't control you with whips. They seduce you with rewards. The more addicted you become to doing everything right, the easier you are to steer. Control masquerades as virtue. Perfection becomes currency. Productivity is your proof of worth. But here's the twist. It's not just that you're being watched. It's that you start watching yourself. You internalize the gaze. You monitor your thoughts, your impulses, your softness, your spontaneity. You begin to fear falling behind, being wrong, appearing weak. And while you chase all the right metrics, your life narrows. Your days become a checklist. Your sense of self merges with your public image. The real you, messy, confused, human, slowly disappears. This isn't accidental. It's profitable. An obedient citizen doesn't rebel. A self-monitoring worker doesn't need a supervisor. A chronically unsatisfied consumer always comes back for more. The most valuable addicts are not hooked on heroin or alcohol. They're hooked on discipline, identity, validation, and the impossible dream of finally being enough. And once you see that, something shifts. The weight of it hits you. The betrayal. You were playing a game you didn't design, following rules you never questioned, winning prizes for being a more efficient prisoner. The outrage doesn't come from the cruelty of the system. It comes from the realization that you helped build it. You optimized yourself for someone else's gain. You traded authenticity for acceptance, and the more obedient you became, the more invisible your cage became. But this pattern, the reward of addiction, the weaponization of control, feels older than the internet, older than capitalism, older than the modern state, as if history itself has been repeating this cycle. The next question isn't just political. It's mythic, ancient. Have we seen this pattern before, across empires, religions, revolutions, and if we have, who are the ones who finally break free? The pursuit of control feels modern, but the addiction is ancient. Before dopamine, before metrics, before algorithms, we still burned for mastery. We still longed to shape the world in our image, and in every civilization, that longing became a myth. Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to man, a symbol of mastery, of control over nature. But his punishment was eternal, not because he failed, but because he succeeded. His crime wasn't defiance, it was a guess, to take what was not his, to hold, to believe he could outsmart the divine order. Then, there's Narcissus. He didn't die from vanity, he died from fixation. He saw his reflection in the water and confused the image with the essence, the self with the soul. He tried to possess what was never separate from him in the first place, and the more he reached, the more it vanished. Even Lucifer, the morning star, fell not because he was evil, but because he tried to be equal to God. He wanted to ascend beyond limits. He wanted the throne. His sin was not darkness, but excessive light, pride as rebellion, control as divinity. These aren't just stories. They are warnings etched in time. They speak to a deeper pattern, across cultures, across religions, across philosophies. The more you clutch at control, the more you become controlled by the need itself. Eastern philosophy took a different path. In Taoism, the way to power is through surrender. The Tao flows where it wills. The sage does not force, but follows. To try to command the river is to be dragged by it. To let go is to be carried. In Zen, there is a saying, the tighter you grasp the sword, the more it cuts you. Because clinging to self, to image, to ideology, creates the very suffering it seeks to escape. Modern psychology echoes this. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the repressed, unconscious parts of ourselves we try to control or deny. But the more we resist the shadow, the more it governs us from the dark. Integration, not domination, is the path to wholeness. The false. God in the mirror is the ego inflated by fear. It tells you that if you just do everything right, if you just optimize, achieve, purify, you will finally be safe, finally be seen. Finally, it will be enough. But that mirror lies, because identity built on control is fragile. It shatters under pressure, and when it does, we confuse the collapse of the image with the collapse of the self. That's why transformation feels like death. Because it is a kind of death. The death of the false self. The burning away of what you thought you had to be. Real peace doesn't come from conquering your environment or curating your reflection. It comes from no longer needing either. The ancient temples crumble, the statues crack, the polished marble returns to dust. And yet, from beneath the ruins, something quieter and wiser begins to grow. Not a new god, not a new system, but a return to something you forgot. Something before control, before identity, before the mirror. A presence, a stillness, an awareness that doesn't grasp, but witnesses. This shift, from outrage to awe, is not about giving up. It's about giving in, not to weakness, but to reality. The world is not here to be mastered. It is here to be experienced, and once you stop trying to possess it, you begin to belong to it. Now comes the hardest part. Letting go, not as collapse, but as transformation. Can you dissolve the need for control without losing yourself? Can you become something new without clinging to what you were? Letting go. It sounds so simple. But to someone whose identity has been built on control, it feels like annihilation. We've been told that to be strong is to be in charge, that to succeed is to dominate our schedule, our emotions, our outcomes. And beneath all this striving, there's a hidden truth most of us are too terrified to touch. Control isn't power, it's protection. From what? From what's raw, unresolved and unhealed. Grief, shame, uncertainty, all the chaotic pieces of life we were never taught to hold. The moment you start letting go, they rise to the surface. Carl Jung warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Because to face it is to confront the shadow. The parts of ourselves that were buried when we learned that love was conditional, that safety came at the price of authenticity. Control becomes a mask, not just for others, but for ourselves. If we can predict, plan, and be perfect enough, maybe we'll never have to feel what's underneath, but the cracks always appear. The burnout, the breakdown, the quiet dread at night that all this effort still doesn't make us feel whole. This is where real transformation begins. Not in fixing, but in feeling. In Buddhism, the path to liberation is not through resistance, but through presence. Mindfulness is not a productivity tool. It's a radical confrontation with reality, without distortion or escape. You sit, you breathe, and you let the tide of discomfort wash over you. In trauma psychology, healing often begins when we stop managing the wound and start witnessing it. The body holds everything the mind tries to forget. And control, whether through addiction, perfectionism, or hyper-independence, is often the nervous system's desperate attempt to feel safe. But safety doesn't come from armor. It comes from integration, from meeting yourself in the places you were once abandoned. This is what surrender really means, not submission, not collapse, but intimacy with the unknown. You walk into the fog without a map. You drop the armor, one piece at a time, realizing it was never protection, only weight. You begin to notice what's been here the whole time, a capacity to feel without fleeing, to sit with sadness without fixing it, to be soft without being broken. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means giving in to the truth you've been circling for years. That certainty was never the point. Presence was. There's a paradox here. The less you cling, the stronger you become. Because now your strength isn't rigid. It's fluid. It bends without breaking. It moves with life instead of bracing against it. And in this space, something unexpected emerges. Hope. Not the naive kind that promises everything will be okay, but the quiet kind, the mature kind, the kind that says, even if nothing is okay, I can still be here. This is how we begin to release the addiction, not just to substances or screens or validation, but to the illusion that control ever made us safe. It starts small, moments of stillness, where you don't rush to the next task, moments of silence, where you don't fill the air with distraction, moments of vulnerability, where you speak the truth you usually hide, moments of randomness, where you let something unfold without engineering the outcome. These aren't acts of weakness. They are acts of reclamation. You are reclaiming your ability to be with life as it is, not as you wish it were. Grief will surface, so will fear, so will anger. That's not failure. That's the thawing of what's been frozen, the return of what was suppressed, and slowly you realize you're still here. You didn't vanish. You didn't fall apart. You just stopped pretending. The sorrow comes in waves, but so does the clarity. And with clarity comes a deeper power, the power to choose, not from fear, but from truth. Because once you stop needing to control the world, you begin to participate in it. Not as a machine, not as a mask, but as a human being. Alive, uncertain, and finally, whole. Now the question is no longer, how do I stay in control? It's, who do I become when I no longer need to be? What if everything you were taught about power was incomplete? Not entirely false, just upside down. Because the real power, the kind no institution can sell you, no ideology can steal, isn't found in control. It's found in what control avoids: uncertainty, creativity, vulnerability, and connection. After surrender, something shifts. At first, it's subtle. You're no longer spending your energy tightening your grip. Instead, you're learning to move with life rather than against it. You stop trying to dominate chaos and start learning from it. This is where we meet a different kind of power, creative power. Not the power to bend reality to your will, but the power to participate in its unfolding. It doesn't conquer. It collaborates. It doesn't command. It composes. Controlling power builds systems to keep things predictable. Creative power trusts its ability to adapt to the unpredictable. The first is brittle. The second, unbreakable. We've seen this before, encoded in myth across cultures, across centuries. The phoenix doesn't rise by clinging to its old feathers. It must burn. Shiva, the destroyer and the creator, reminds us that to truly transform, something must end. And from that ending comes life. Modern psychology gives it a name: post-traumatic growth. The strange, paradoxical truth that people who've suffered, shattered, and surrendered often emerge more alive than before. Not because they conquered their pain, but because they let it remake them. Think of the artist who can finally paint again, not because the pain went away, but because they stopped resisting it. The parent who learns to truly connect, not by perfecting their child, but by meeting them with vulnerability. The leader who earns trust, not through authority, but through humility. In each case, power is no longer a mask. It's a presence. It's not performative. It's participatory. There is no formula for this. You don't graduate into it. You feel your way through it, slowly, messily. You fail, you tremble, you soften. And then, something astonishing happens. You begin to trust yourself, not because you have all the answers, but because you know how to deal with the unknown. Imagine someone once broken, once buried beneath armor and shame, now dancing, awkwardly, joyfully, with the chaos they once feared. They aren't cured, but they are free. And that freedom isn't found in perfection. It's found in motion, in the refusal to freeze. This is the birth of presence, the kind of presence that isn't rooted in dominance, but in aliveness. You begin to see power differently, not as something you wield over others, but as something you awaken within yourself and in others. True power doesn't isolate. It connects. It doesn't hurt. It generates. It doesn't need to be right. It wants to be real. We were never meant to be gods of control. That was the illusion. The real gift, the one hidden behind the fall, the failure, the surrender, is the power to create, to connect, and to begin again. And once you've tasted it, you realize why they never taught you about it, because it can't be monetized, it can't be weaponized, and it can't be contained. This power doesn't make you invincible. It makes you human, fully, fearfully, radiantly, human. And from here, the question is no longer what you can control. It's what you can become. We were told that discipline would set us free. That order was safe. That control meant maturity. So we obeyed. We managed our time, our impulses, our identities. Constructing a life so well structured it began to feel invincible. But somewhere along the way, the structure became a shell. The safety became sterile. The control became a cage. And the cruelest part? The cage was made of gold. It glittered with the praise of others. It shimmered with the comfort of predictability. It sparkled with the illusion of superiority. You looked around and saw that you had done everything right. You had built a life that looked free, but you didn't feel free. You felt trapped, and no one could see it, not even you. Because this prison doesn't come with bars. It comes with achievements, with perfectly curated identities, with finely tuned routines and endless optimization. It comes with applause. But underneath the performance, something aches, something restless, something real. What if freedom isn't earned through perfection, but uncovered through surrender? What if letting go, not tightening your grip, is how you finally touch life? We were taught to fear chaos, but maybe it wasn't the chaos we feared. Maybe it was exposure, vulnerability, the terrifying possibility that without control, we might finally feel everything. And yet that's where life lives. Not in the neat rows of our plans, but in the wildness we try to tame. Real connection can't be controlled. Real intimacy defies management. Creativity is born from mess, not order. And selfhood, true, living selfhood, isn't built. It's revealed. Society runs on the myth of mastery. It asks you to be efficient, presentable, and always in command. It markets products, politics, and personas that promise dominance over uncertainty. But all of it is bait, because the more you try to master life, the more distant you become from it. What if questioning this myth is the first act of rebellion? Not loud, not destructive, just honest. What if freedom begins with the willingness to say, I don't know, I don't control, I don't need to? In a world addicted to control, surrender is radical. You don't escape the cage by breaking it. You escape by seeing it, by realizing it was never locked, that you were always free to leave. But leaving meant facing the unknown. And the unknown doesn't flatter you. It doesn't reward you. It doesn't guarantee anything. But it is alive. Freedom doesn't feel like victory. It feels like vulnerability. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like stepping out of the golden cage and into the unfiltered brightness of possibility. You won't master this. That's not the point. You'll wobble. You'll regress. You'll reach for the old armor. But if you keep walking, not toward control, but toward contact, you begin the slow, beautiful undoing, not of your life, but of the illusion that you ever needed to hold it so tightly. Let go. Not to lose yourself, but to find the self they told you to hide. And when the cage opens, don't ask if you're ready, just step into the light.